of clean, fresh water. Yeah, indeed. Sorry. And today we are going to be looking at specifically the home, water in the home through the permaculture lens. So before I dive into a small presentation that I want to share with you, as in the previous sessions, which you will also again have access to, I wanted to ask you a few questions because after our first session, where we saw why the water cycle is off balance and what the problem is, and then after the second session, when we learned more about the elements of a watershed and how we can stop erosion and retain water longer on the land, I'm now wondering if you are actually aware of where your water comes from. So you won't have to talk or write on any whiteboard or anything like that, but maybe you can use the reactions. On the bottom of your screen, you will see the thumbs up and the heart and the clapping. If anyone doesn't see them, you can just go testing it. Yeah, I think sometimes it even works with recognition. If your hand is up, then it will actually send the hand up as well. So I'm going to launch a few questions now, and I would like to see your reaction, any reaction, if you know indeed the answer. So here is question number 1. Do you know where the water in your house comes from? Okay, good. We have several people there. We even have a no reaction. So Naja, thank you. There are some people who know and some people who don't. Now, is your water coming from groundwater? Is it from a well? Is the municipality pumping up water? Yeah, here we are also seeing a lot of yes, yep, that's where it's coming. Is there anyone here that actually already actively catches and stores rainwater? We have fingers up and some more coming in. Yay. Good. Okay, so some people are already catching and storing rainwater, so hopefully today may also be of interest and of help to you to maybe help you size these deposits that you are using, etc. So any question that comes up during the presentation, please do put it in the chat, and I may make a couple of breaks and immediately also come to the response for your question, so that we don't forget the whole context of the question. So feel free to put the questions in the chat when they come up. And if I need more context, then maybe I will ask you to also open your microphone and give me further information. So over to today's presentation. And we're going to be also reviewing a few patterns and concepts that we have already seen in the last sessions, remembering that the fresh water that is accessible to us is a very small amount of all of the water there, and also reminding us all that it is in this very thin layer of surface water. The ice is in the ice, or it is melting and it is mixing with the salt water. The deep groundwater is very high energy water. We do not want to be pumping and using energy to get water to our homes. And on the other hand, we don't even know the impact of us extracting water out of its natural space. So the very, very thin line of surface water is the water we can work with. And we're looking at how much water we need, because if we look at the world's use, then we see that overall we have 70% of all the fresh water that is being used going to agriculture. We have a smaller portion, 22%, going to industry, and only 8% is actually domestic use. So this always makes me reflect on, that's funny, because they always tell us to turn off the tap when you are brushing your teeth, have very short showers, make sure you have a double button on your toilet. So they are trying to make us as the end user solve a big problem that is maybe actually not a domestic problem. You know, if the overall use of water only has a very small portion use in the house, in the home, then why are we getting so... But then, of course, if we think about it, agriculture and industry, it has to do with the choices we make in our home. And there is a difference actually between low and middle income countries and high income countries. And I think that all the people present here have the privilege to say that we live in a high income country. And here we see that the domestic use actually goes up a little bit. So maybe we can actually take a bit more care of the water we use in the home. This just as a bit of a context. And now we're going to dive deep into the topic of water in the home. First, we want to be referring to our home as an ecosystem, as a living entity. It is actually a home as a domestic metabolism. It has its own needs and it will extract from the surroundings the resources it needs to cover those. Then it will absorb what it needs and use everything from the outside. And then there will be some waste, some things that, no, we actually don't need this, and they will be excreted again. They will be sent back into the surroundings. So our home can be seen as a living system, as its own cell, as a metabolic home. So we need inputs, we will then settle it, and then we will have outputs, as we like to call it in permaculture design. So inputs, we were talking already in the previous sessions that we want to be looking at the use of renewable and biological resources, as the principle says. And in this case, it will be superficial water, surface water. We want to be using this as the first resource for our freshwater needs. Water from rivers, lakes, the rain, wetlands, and very shallow aquifers that continuously and quickly recharge with rainfall. And the image on the right is, of course, referring to a change of paradigm, not try to seek refuge from the rain and make it go away, but actually turn that umbrella upside down and capture each little drop of rainwater, because it is so precious to us. And why is it precious to us? Because if we look at the Danish context, these are maps that I found of the groundwater quality. Remember, in previous sessions we spoke of quantity and quality, and in Denmark maybe the quantity is not such a problem, but the quality is getting worse, because there are many areas where there is arsenic found in the drinking water and where there are pesticides or nitrates in the drinking water, all due to, of course, the land use in that area. And on the right here, we see that it actually takes years and years and years for the deeper groundwater levels. It actually takes centuries or millennia for them to refill. So if we take more than what we refill, then our bank account starts to draw red numbers, and we are not in a financially or in a waterly, hydrologically good space. So we want to be knowing as well, how is our future going to be with reference to temperatures and water from the skies, so rainfall. And for Denmark, I actually found that there will be more rainfall, but also more higher temperatures. So if we look at Europe, this is Denmark here, there will be a slight change in the temperatures, and there will also be more, it will be darker blue, as we refer to the rainfall. Here, actually, there is even a drastic augmentation in temperature, and the rainfall barriers, there's some drier years, the yellowish lines, but there is actually coming more and more very wet years as well. But when we have more temperature, we also will have more evaporation. So actually, the more water that falls may actually overall more quickly leave and go back up into the atmosphere. So these are all very complex calculations that are maybe beyond the scope of today's session, but things that we want to be keeping in mind when we are designing for our own systems. So we're going to go and review the pattern language that we have already been working with, and that was starting from any watershed. Any watershed had or has 4 elements. There is a catchment area, conduction zones, storage, and distribution. And our homes are actually watersheds as well. So if we look at the bigger pattern, there is in our smaller home the same detail, the fractal repeats itself. So we have a catchment area, the roof, we have a conduction zone, the guttering, we have a storage area, which is the tank in this little image, and then we have distribution. The pipes go to the kitchen, the bathroom, the laundry area, the garden, etc. So just as in a bigger watershed, in our small detailed fractal of our home, we have the same elements. So when we are looking at the catchment area, remember we were looking at square meters. We need to look at how many square meters is our roof. And then to know how much water we can actually catch from our catchment area, our roof, we need to observe closely the quality. Maybe you remember that there was a coefficient for runoff on forested areas or plowed and naked soil watersheds, and the difference was very big from one to another. Here in this case, we can actually say that a green roof may well energetically be very interesting because it keeps the home warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. But if we are going to a water scarce future, maybe we want to change that roof surface to a different type of surface. Maybe we would rather have a tiled roof or even a metal roof, because then we can catch more water and store it in a cleaner fashion. On a green roof, at least 50% of the rainwater will stay actually in the soil and in the plants. So we will only be able to catch 50% of what falls on that catchment area. It all depends, of course, so each context is different, but you need to be aware that we are looking at how many square meters and the quality of the square meters. And then we have diameters of guttering and the linear meters of the channels that we need to catch all the water from our roofs. We also want to give it a little bit of a percentage so that it runs to the corner where we have the downpipes going into our tanks. And the tanks can be of all sorts of materials, of all sorts of sizes, of course. And this has often to do with the space that you have, because if you have a large, nice, flat space like this, and you don't have so much money, then actually a flexible tank like this could be of interest. If you have a lot of space and a little bit more money, or you have people who know how to build a ferro cement tank, then you could have one of these underground, which is a bit more costly. And if you have a resource that is maybe a waste product in your area, like sometimes these tanks are, then you could use these and make sure that you make the best of them and that you produce no waste, because you will be reusing them. But then on the other hand, look at this. It becomes very obvious if you have a recycled product. These are barrels, for example, from olives or olive oil that we can often get here in Spain. It is then saving on money. It is repurposing a waste product. But look at the amount of plastic connections that you need to buy, and then can eventually maybe have a leak. So they will need more maintenance. So again, it depends on space, money, resources, and capacity to maintain. But we will need to look at how many cubic meters or how many liters of water do we actually want to catch and store. And it's not just wanting, it's actually what can we get and what do we need. And what can we get depends on the rainfall per month. Remember also the climograms. If there is a long dry period in the summer, you need to calculate the covering of the dry period. And then there is, of course, your need. You need to know what you need. So the sizing of your storage will depend on all these calculations. So catching and conducing it, we need to make sure that the quality is the best for our drinking water. And this is a typical example of a first flush filter, very easy to build. The water comes off the roof, which is in this case a bit of a creative, complex installation. But then before it goes into the tank, it actually goes into this little container. And when it fills up, there is a floating ball that stops this connection. So the floating ball will be bloink, closing this container, and all the leaves and the first sediments that are washed off the roof will stay in this container, and then the clean water can run into the deposit. So this is a very easy first flush filter, and there are many commercial filters like this as well to be had. So then after catching it, conducting it, making sure the quality is top, we want to be storing it. And this is another type of material. This is a very durable and high resistance material, recycled. Actually, the name is now out of my head, and less in Spanish even. But this is a bot. Its commercial name is a bot, and we use it often because it is so strong and because it is standing. So you can use it to have some pressure already. in your garden, for example, if you just want to use it above ground, but you can also dig a hole and put it underground so it is strong enough to have the pressure of the soil on it. So catching and conducing, and then storage, and then of course we have the distribution. These were the 4 elements of any watershed. Catchment, the roof in our home, conduction, the guttering, storage, the deposit, and then the distribution. In our home, it can go to the bathroom, to the kitchen, to the laundry room, and also to the gardens. So as in any watershed, this is what we have in our home as well. And let me just check if there is a comment here. Yes, we also need to look at winter temperatures and store water safely as water and not ice, like 80 centimeters under the soil surface. Of course, indeed, if you are in an area where there is snowfall or a lot of frost, then you need to indeed look at this plumbing. For example, here in the distribution map, it needs to be at least 80 centimeters underground for your water to not freeze. Indeed, very good remark. Thank you for that. So we've had the 4 elements as in the watershed, and then reviewing the 4 areas of intervention. Now we want to regenerate our water cycle. In the landscape, these were the 4 areas of regeneration: topography, earthworks, moving, building little retentions. We wanted to work with water bodies, big or small. We wanted to build small biodiversity ponds and bigger ponds and swales maybe, etc. And then 2 main actors that are often forgotten are the vegetation, that are the main parts of the biotic pump, actually attracting rain and making it rain. And then, of course, the soils. The soils are our biggest water storage in the landscapes. Now, bringing it to the domestic area, what are our 4 areas of intervention? We want to be catching and storing the rainwater from our cemented footprint. So there where our house is, that is our responsibility. We have impermeabilized the area where our home now stands and where previously rain could get into the groundwater reservoirs. So for these square meters, we want to make sure that we catch all of this water and guide it safely into the landscape without creating erosion or flood risks. So this is our responsibility. Then we want to be reducing the use of fresh water because, of course, remembering session number 1, there is only a limited amount of fresh water and there is always more and more people. 6 million people in Denmark. It has been growing over the years. So the water that falls is the water that is there for your use. Now, there is currently enough, but the land use, the erosion, the floods, the contamination may make it harder for each person to have safe access to enough. So getting ready and reducing your need is a good strategy. And one of those strategies actually lies in the regeneration and the reusing of your wastewaters. If you can already annul or delete your need for watering your garden, then that is a great savings. Plus also you are doing your immediate ecosystem a favor because you are bringing a little bit more nutrients to the system around your home. And then the last strategy, the shopping wisely, is, I think, a very, very big one because as we saw at the beginning of the presentation, a big part of the water use does not lie in the home, in the domestic use, but it lies in agriculture and in industry. So if we make the right choices when we consume products, we can actually bring that water use down as well. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. Actually, in our larger urban context, in our built environment, we can, of course, observe the differences between what is now a reality on many coastlines, very packed and very cemented, and a lot of water will quickly run off and get into the salt water context. And naturally, this takes a lot more time. The biotic pump is calling the rain again, and less water is drained into the sea fast. So actually, Copenhagen has a very good example already of how to work with water in the urban context. Inghaven Park is a climate park. So all of this is water catchment area, and underneath this park, if I understand correctly, there is huge rainwater storage, which can then be used to cover the needs of parts of the city in Copenhagen. And there is many Chinese sponge cities and lots of examples of how to use the water in urban environments. There is suds and infiltration basins and soakaways and green roofs and wetlands, etc. So the larger domestic context, the built environment and the administrations can do a lot to help water stay in our constructed environment. And we also already saw this example of Brad Lancaster's books, which is now the law in Tucson, Arizona. All of the urbanizations need to have water retention on the sides of the roads. So our own home, how much can it actually catch? Let's look at an example. I'm just going for a very typical 120 square meter, 100 square meter roof surface in a temperate climate. Of course, there is a lot of areas in Denmark that might be closer to the warmer temperate climates, and some areas in Denmark that are closer to the very cold temperate version. So I'm just going to be looking at a general example and also a general rainfall example. Some areas have had less rainfall than 700 liters per year. Oh, I see that I still have annual here. Sorry, that is supposed to be a year. And some areas have more and will for sure have more rainfall in the future. So if a normal home in Denmark is maybe also 120 square meter roof surface, then we can catch per year 84,000 liters. And if we look at the climogram here, remember that every month there is rainfall. So this means that the 84,000 liters per year that we can actually catch it very continuously. Every month of the year, we can fill a tank of 1/12 of 84,000 liters, which is very good for our money because our pocket will not have to be too deep if we can have a smaller tank. Imagine if you are living in Spain like I am. In some areas it is dry for 6 months, so we need to be able to catch the amount of rain in 2 periods, the springtime and the autumn. So we need a big tank to be able to hold all the water that comes in more strong events. So 84,000 liters is what a general medium home could give us. And if we then look at what our needs are, sorry, this is still in Spanish as well, because I've actually not found an English alternative, but I hope that you can kind of get the idea. In the kitchen, there is for cooking about 8 liters per day, for washing the dishes, about 50 liters, for washing your hands in the bathroom, maybe 30 liters a day, a shower, 5-minute shower, 50 liters. You need to have a good shower head for it to be only 50 liters in 5 minutes. And then there is the toilet, 5 liters every time you press the button, etc., etc. 80 liters for a washing machine. There used to be washing machines that would use 100 to 120 liters per load. Now there are also more energetically efficient washing machines that maybe only use 45 to 50 liters per load. But if you have these numbers, you can then actually make a list. I don't know if there is anybody here. That was actually a good question for the beginning as well. Do you know how many liters you are using per week? Because you can then per day make a record of your water use. How often am I showering? How often do I push the button on the toilet? How often do I brush my teeth? And then calculate the total amount of water used at the end of the week. And then you can have the average per day. And now I found that in Denmark, the average is actually 114 liters per person per day. That would mean that a person in Denmark would need approximately 41,000 liters per year, which would fit in a big container like this. So now we already know that this big container, if we have a big container like this, we can store all the water we need for the whole year in this one container and just keep using it. But remember, we also know that it actually rains almost every month, a similar amount. So we could use a tank that is 1/12 of this container. But now, do we live alone in our home? Or is a general family maybe 4 people in any home under the rooftop of 120 square meters? So if that would be the case, if 4 people live in one home that can catch and store approximately 80,000 liters, then we would need 166,000 liters for our personal needs. We can catch 84,000 liters per year. 4 people in one home need 166,000 liters per year. This does not match up. We can catch less water than what we need. So what is the answer? Maximum 2 people live in one home. I think the answer
We need
will
to
have
build
to...
a bigger house to catch
Yeah,
more family.
exactly. Very good. That is often a response as well, indeed. We need a bigger home. So we are going to be needing to reduce the need, and this is our strategy or area of intervention number 2. We need to use less water in our home, and maybe you've already seen some of these modern or creative ideas, like for example, whilst the water in the shower is warming up, you fill a bucket so that you can water the plants. Showering together is also a way of saving water. Then there are funky new showers like the Nebbia. Maybe you have already heard of this. This only uses 2 liters per minute compared to the 10 to 15 liters per minute in a normal shower head. And why does it have 2? Because it is vapor, so it cools down very quickly. So this ring, you can actually adjust it so that it is very close to your head, and you have another ring that focuses some water on your body so that you don't get cold in the shower. Very weird experience. I was lucky to try it once, and it's very effective. I'm not sure if I'm convinced though. Maybe I would prefer to only shower once a week and save water that way than installing the Nebbia. But it's a great idea. And then there's also creative things like the water that you use to wash your hands is not so dirty, and it can actually fill the toilet, and you could then flush the toilet with it. So flushing the toilet, is that actually necessary? Well, let's look at strategy number 3, or the area of intervention number 3. reduce and reuse wastewaters. So there's no such thing as waste, says the permaculture principle. So grey water can actually be quite easily reused in our home with a bit of care that we make sure that there is enough of mulch and organic matter like we saw in the last session. With black water, we need to make sure we have a bit more care. There is phytodepuration, there is biogas possibilities, there is all sorts of wetland techniques, etc. But there are nature-based solutions to actually totally clean our black waters as well. And another type of wastewater is actually the chlorinated water in our swimming pools. Now, this may not be such a thing in Denmark, but here in Spain, every new villa has a swimming pool. And this is very, very exaggerated because many of these villas, they actually are so close to the sea that they could walk or ride a bike. Why do you need a swimming pool? Of course, this is for touristic reasons or because we have just become so used to it. And the chlorinated water that you need to send off into the natural context from time to time when you are backwashing the filter, it actually is very damaging. It is salinifying the context and it does not allow for normal plant growth. So changing the chlorinated pool to a natural pool is a very good do not create waste strategy, especially in Mediterranean areas. So the use of the water in our homes, this is again a graphic in Spanish because it's a scientific graphic that I've not yet been able to find a Danish replacement for, but it shows that the main usage in the home is in the ducha or shower, and then after that it is lavabo, which is in the toilet, but in the washing hands and cleaning yourself, etc., etc. And then the next big thing is excretas and orina. Maybe you can get the gist. Excrements and urine. So shower, big thing. Short showers or the Nebbia shower may well actually still be a good idea. Washing your hands and closing the tap may actually well be a good idea. And then the toilet here. So the toilet is a big thing. If you can change to a dry toilet, top solution. Grey waters are easily reused. Black water is harder. So if you can do away with black water altogether and go for a dry toilet, fantastic. If not, then there are systems that work with phytodepuration, like the ones that you see here in these photos. If you can work with gravity on the home plot, then that is fantastic, although this is maybe less the possibility in Denmark, where it is all rather flat. Maybe you will have to work with pumps, but there are very strong or potent solar pumps already these days that can move water when it is needed. And here is the living machine, which is a well-known example in the Findhorn Eco Village in Scotland, where here we see Michael Shaw showing my colleague Mei-Ling from Permamed when we were visiting there in 2021. So this is the solution for an eco village with approximately 350-400 residents, and it all fits in one greenhouse. Actually, one of the two tunnels is enough, but they have two just so if there is a problem in one, they can close it for maintenance and the other one takes over. But one of these systems with, I think, 6 or 7 water barrels in it is enough to clean all the water, wastewater of 350 residents approximately. And so here we see the making of a food forest and medicinal garden from absolute desertic sand plot to now, or this is 2 years later, but it is now much bigger even. And this is in a school, a local school here in the Valletta. My partner built this for the living education school where his son was a few years ago, and it is still going strong. The children wash their hands and wash their painting materials, the natural paints, and this is the result. So you can also scale it. It doesn't have to be a system for a small home. It can be bigger homes, small hotels like we see here. This is a phytodepuration for a 20 people home. This is for a bit larger hotel. Here, this is for a winery, actually. The winery uses citric acid for cleaning the big tanks in the bodega after the harvesting of the grapes, and then it gets stored in these big plastic deposits. So it can also actually be adapted to a whole community of apartments that then together use their wastewater again in this garden area. And this is detail, but which you maybe want to look at when you get the presentation, but this is the type of diagnostics that we make. How much water is coming in from the rain and from regenerated wastewater? How much are you actually using? This does not fit. What do you need to do? Looking at your needs, at your resources, and at your seasonal availability is important for our permaculture design. We need to know how much do we need in every month of the year and how much do we actually have access to in every month of the year. And the wet systems is another well-known system for regenerating the water that you are contaminating in your homes, and it can then be for a small community, like this is from a small village, this system, it can create a beautiful biodiversity hotspot. So strategy number 4, the last types of action that you can take in your home. When we look at the visible water that is being consumed, which we have been talking about, bathroom, showers, the washing your hands, washing your clothes, etc., cooking even, it is only a very thin slice of the pie. All the rest of the water of the footprint of a person lies in the invisible water that we consume. And this is the shopping that I was referring to earlier. So the virtual water lies in what we eat, where we buy, if we recycle our clothes, do we shop secondhand, can we cook more efficiently, like for example, steam or vapor cooking, etc. So this is something that we can also look deeper into, because on this graphic, this is a typical infographic that you find, but then there is, of course, a lot of differences between this chicken, which is maybe a conventional agriculture chicken, and a regenerative chicken. So there are some differences that you can look at, but you can see that chocolate is a huge one, that your coffee, of course, is also counting. If you have 10 coffees per day, then you may already be getting close to the meat that you are eating, etc. So it is a bit of a calculation that we need to get better at and that we need to understand better as well, I think. But for sure, there is a lot that we can do still. And supporting regenerative agriculture in our area is one of the first steps I would recommend to take in our home, apart from the repair cafes and not buy a new TV when the old one is not doing its best, or when the toaster is broken. If there is no repair cafe in your area, maybe you can start it. The transition towns movements are giving you a lot of toolkits to set up these types of initiatives. So that could be something to look at as well, or make a map of all the second-hand shops in your area, etc. So that is for today our